You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about why some people in America, but really anywhere, seem so quick to judge. Not based on evidence, not based on real danger, but based on stories, media, narratives. It's like the brain rewires itself, and I want to talk about that with actual science behind it. Because I don't believe that kind of reaction is random. I believe it's structural, psychological, neurological. So let's get into it. Why crime media messes with your brain? The science behind it. There's this well-established phenomenon in media psychology called mean world syndrome. The idea is simple. If you're repeatedly exposed to violence, crime, horror, you start to believe the world is more dangerous than it actually is. Researchers who have studied this found that heavy consumption of crime dramas, reality crime shows, sensationalized news, even social media crime stories correlate strongly with increased fear of crime, overestimation of crime rates, and heightened sense of personal risk. In one study with 711 adults, for example, more crime drama viewing predicted higher perceived personal risk and lower sense of safety, both of which drove elevated fear of crime. Another study focusing on social media consumption found that greater exposure, not just news, but general social media use, was significantly associated with fear of crime, especially among people who already felt less safe. So this isn't some fringe theory, it's measured. Neuroscience, exposure to violent media changes how you process reality. Now, it gets darker, not just psychologically, but neurologically. A study published in Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience observed that even short-term exposure to violent film content, it means the brain begins to dampen its response to normal human emotion cues, especially faces and expressions, after watching violence. In practice, that means empathy, caution, emotional processing all get dulled. Exposure doesn't just change what you think, it changes how you feel. It changes how you react to real humans. Parallel bodies of research have shown that media violence, films, television, games, significantly increases the likelihood for aggression, hostile thoughts, reduce pro-social behavior, both short-term and long-term. So imagine someone constantly absorbing crime documentaries, sensational videos, true crime stories. Their brain might start to treat the world as hostile by default. Not because the world changed, but because their neural baseline adjusted. How perception gets distorted, from data to drama in the mind. Here's the thing. Real crime statistics over decades in many places, including the US, show that violent crime in many categories has declined. Yet, public perception, repeatedly polled, suggests the opposite. That crime is rising, that the world is more dangerous. That's a gap, a very wide one. Why does that gap exist? Because human cognition is flawed. Our brains lean on heuristics, mental shortcuts. One is the availability of heuristic. When vivid, easily recalled events dominate our memory, we overestimate their frequency and danger. A grisly murder case sticks. A dramatic trial sticks. A shocking documentary sticks. These memories overshadow normal, boring, peaceful daily life. So we treat the exceptional as the norm. Media saturates those vivid memories constantly, and that creates a feedback loop. More media exposure equals more perceived danger, which equals to even more attention to crime content and more distorted worldview. Behavioral consequences: fear, mistrust, suspicion, societal change. This isn't just about anxiety, it's about how people act, how they treat each other, how they assume guilt or innocence, how they judge before knowing. Studies show that heavy viewers of crime media are more likely to believe their own neighborhoods are unsafe, even if objective data says otherwise. That fear, perceived or real, changes behavior. You avoid walking alone at night. You mistrust strangers. You judge people based on minor signals. You treat normal human behavior as suspicious. It also affects institutions. Sensational media breeds demand for tougher law enforcement, stricter justice, harsher punishments, even if crime rates are flat or falling. Ironically, that can warp the justice system. Fear-driven policies, moral panic, and reactionary decisions increase, not necessarily because the threat rose, but because perception did. Why true crime content is especially potent? Why does true crime hit harder than a generic horror movie or drama? Because it's framed as real. People hear true and subconsciously earmark it as this could happen to me. It becomes personal, real, probable, and due to that, the neural and psychological effects intensify. That emotional anesthetization, that fear buildup, that distorted worldview, it doesn't stay in the realm of fiction. It bleeds into everyday judgments. True crime leans on suspense, shock, manipulation, selective storytelling, and the brain, especially under repeated exposure, learns to expect shock, expects danger, treats others as characters, not humans. Why someone's OJ gloves comment isn't random, it's predictable. There's this story recently about a comment that was made that was a snide reference after something small. Here's why it's not random. The person's brain, socialized by decades of crime media bombardment, reached for the easiest script in their internal database. Gloves plus suspicion equals crime. They're not thinking, could be nothing. They're thinking, pattern recognized. That doesn't mean they're evil. It means their internal wiring has been subtly rewired by media exposure and collective conditioning. Not everyone's affected the same, but many are. Yes, research shows effects vary by personality, context, prior victimization, and demographics. Some people may consume true crime and feel more empathetic or curious, not paranoid. But many more start leaning toward fear, cynicism, suspicion, especially if they lack real-life exposure to positive social trust, have weak social networks, or already feel insecure. And because media algorithms feed what you click, people often end up in echo chambers, a constant feed of violence, fear, suspicion, what-ifs. That loop reinforces itself. What this means, individually and societally, people become more anxious, more suspicious, less trusting, more reactive. Their baseline for normal shifts toward threat. Socially, increased demand for security, police, stricter laws, mistrust of strangers, institutions, even friends. Hesitation to connect, to empathize. Institutionally, justice becomes sensationalized. Policy becomes fear-driven. Normal life becomes shaped by worst-case scenarios, not average reality. In short, media-induced fear rewires society slowly, not through riots or revolutions, but through daily choices, reactions, suspicions, social distance. So, what's the point? I'm not saying stop watching true crime. I'm not saying everyone becomes a paranoid vigilante. I'm saying be aware. Understand that what you watch affects you, not just emotionally, but neurologically, cognitively, socially. Recognize when your brain is drawing from drama-based memories instead of measured reality. Question your assumptions. Do I believe this because I saw a documentary, or because I have real data, real context, real reason? Am I reacting to a person or to a meme inside my head? Because if you don't check that, your worldview might shift silently, subtly, until one day you look around and see fear, suspicion, cynicism, distance, and you don't remember when it happened. Alright, let me talk about something real for a second, because it's something I've been noticing more and more, and it's wild how deep it actually goes. You ever say something or someone says something to you and you're like, why the hell did your mind even go there? Like it came out of nowhere, and you realize people aren't reacting to you. They're reacting to whatever's been programmed in their brain without them even noticing it. And it's crazy because most people don't even realize how much the stuff they watch, the stuff they scroll through, the stories they consume actually shape the way they see every little situation. Something simple happens and suddenly their mind connects it to some crime doc or some famous case they saw on Netflix, or something they heard in a podcast, or some viral video where something wild happened. They're not reacting from logic. They're reacting from the mental shortcuts that their brain has stored up from all that content. And the deeper you look into it, the more it makes sense why people are like this, especially in America. People think it's because Americans are smarter or more observant or more critical. Nah, man. It's because the average American brain is fried with thousands of hours of fear-based entertainment. That's what no one wants to admit. They watch true crime like it's their religion. They binge murder stories, they scroll through caught-on-camera videos all day, they consume fear, trauma, betrayal, every type of danger you can think of. And they do it for entertainment. And you can't consume all that without it rewiring your brain. Neuroscience literally shows this. They've done fMRIs on people watching violent clips, and the brain doesn't differentiate between real danger and fictional danger. The amygdala fires like you're actually in the situation. And that's the crazy part. The brain thinks it's being trained. It thinks it's preparing you for threats. So after years of watching crime and chaos, the brain becomes hypersensitive to anything that even slightly resembles what it saw on screen. So someone sees a tiny detail in real life and boom, their brain connects it to some dramatic case from 20 years ago or something they saw yesterday on a TikTok investigation thread. It's not because they're thinking deeper, it's because their threat detection system got hijacked by media repetition. Humans didn't evolve with this stuff. We evolved in tribes, around real people, real interactions. We weren't made to be fed thousands of artificial fear scenarios every single week. And the thing is, fear is addictive. Not in a haha, I like scary movies type of way. No fear gives your brain dopamine. Not the good kind, but the anticipation kind. It makes the world feel more intense, and once people get used to consuming fear constantly, their brain starts looking for danger even when it's not there. It's like their internal radar is always scanning, always checking, always linking things together that don't even belong together. This is why someone will see you doing something normal and their brain goes, oh, that reminds me of that case I saw, or that looks like the guy on the news. It's not rational at all. It's subconscious instinct. And once you see that, you start to understand why people jump to conclusions so fast, why they assume the worst, why they're suspicious of everything, why they judge before they think. It's not personal. It's how their brain's been conditioned. And it's not just true crime. It's everything. It's the news. It's social media. It's political fear campaigns. Constant outrage. Shock content. People arguing online every day. The nervous system never gets a break. Everyone's in fight or flight mode 24/7. And they think that's normal. Their brains are overstimulated, overstressed, exhausted, and then they start using cognitive shortcuts just to make sense of things quicker. Our brains try to protect us by recognizing patterns, but in a world filled with exaggerated, dramatic, edited, sensationalized patterns, people start applying that to real life. So instead of processing something slowly, calmly, logically, the brain goes, oh, this feels like that one thing I saw, so let me assume, and you end up with people who aren't even thinking, they're just reacting. When you talk to people now, you're not talking to their authentic mind. You're talking to their mental diet. If their diet is constant fear, constant crime, constant suspicion, constant negativity, that's what you're going to get back from them. You're not dealing with them, you're dealing with their conditioning. And when you realize that, a lot of things start to make sense. Why people misinterpret things. Why they get triggered over nothing. Why their first instinct is mistrust. Why they're quick to judge. Why they see danger everywhere. Why they assume the worst. It's because they've spent thousands of hours training their brain to expect the worst. These are real scientific behaviors: pattern matching, narrative attachment, availability bias, fear conditioning, hypervigilance, and when you mix all that with a country that has some of the highest stress levels in the world, the longest work hours, the most depth, the most unstable systems, and nonstop media stimulation, you get a population that's always on edge, always suspicious, always overthinking, always connecting dots that don't even exist. So when someone makes a weird comment or jumps to a wild conclusion or judges you based on the smallest things, You can't even take it personal. They aren't seeing you. They're seeing their fears, their mental file cabinets full of crime documentaries, their subconscious pattern library full of traumatic storylines, their nervous system that's been overstimulated since childhood. There's a whole science behind why people think the way they do, but nobody ever talks about it in real life situations like it matters. But it does matter, because when you understand what's going on underneath the surface, the brain chemistry, the conditioning, the psychology, suddenly everything they do makes sense. And it's not deeper because they're deep thinkers. It's deeper because their brains are overloaded with fear-coded patterns. And honestly, that's why I don't take anything personally anymore. The more you understand how humans work on a biological and psychological level, the more you realize most people are running on autopilot. They're not choosing these reactions, they're running scripts installed by media, by stress, by culture, by everything their nervous system has been exposed to. And once you really get that, you start seeing the world from a whole different angle. You stop reacting to people emotionally, you start observing them. You start understanding what's actually happening beneath their behavior. And that awareness, that changes everything. You know what's crazy about the human mind? That every single day you walk around convinced you're looking at the world directly, but you're actually staring at a filtered projection that your brain stitched together half a second late. People think reality is this objective, solid thing. But neuroscience already proved that everything you experience, every color, every sound, every emotion, is processed through layers of prediction and memory. You never access the raw thing. You only access what your brain thinks is out there. That's why two people can stand in the same room, witness the same event, and walk away with completely different interpretations. And that difference isn't because one is smarter than the other. It's because the internal world model inside their brain was built from different childhoods, different traumas, different societal conditioning, different dopamine patterns, different learned fears. When scientists scan the brain, they can literally see that experiences get compressed into these prediction templates. Your brain uses them like shortcuts. You think you're reacting to reality, but most of the time you're reacting to old data. And if that doesn't blow your mind enough, here's something even more insane. Whenever you remember something, your brain actually rewrites the memory. It's called memory reconsolidation. So every memory you have, even your strongest ones, is a remix of the original moment, plus your current emotions, plus your present beliefs. People think their memories are cameras. They're not. They're stories your brain edits in real time. That means most people are making decisions today based on memories that aren't even accurate. This is why society ends up feeling strange, disconnected, or suspicious, because everyone is walking around with different versions of the truth. And those versions are influenced by algorithms, social pressure, dopamine reinforcement, trauma patterns, and millions of micro interactions. So when you look around and something feels off, you're not imagining it. You're noticing the cracks in the collective hallucination. And if you go deeper into neuroscience, it gets even crazier. There are neurons in your brain called mirror neurons that fire when you see someone else's behavior. That means your brain literally simulates other people inside you. You absorb body language, tone, tension, micro expressions, even when you don't realize it. And this is why environments matter so much. If you're surrounded by stressed people, your cortisol rises. If you're surrounded by confident people, your posture shifts. If you're surrounded by people with no ambition, your dopamine baseline adjusts downward. You think you're choosing your environment, but your environment is modifying your brain's chemistry every second. And that brings up another thing. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical, it's the motivation chemical. It's the thing that makes you chase, anticipate, desire. Modern life is engineered around that. You open your phone and get micro dopamine hits through notifications. Not enough to fulfill you, but enough to keep you hooked. Neuroscientists call this intermittent reward. The same principle used in slot machines, and the human brain, even genius level brains, is extremely vulnerable to intermittent reward. if your dopamine system gets hijacked early, you end up living inside loops you never consciously chose. People underestimate how fragile the mind is. A single strong emotional experience in childhood can shape your entire adult personality. A single moment of humiliation can wire a lifelong fear response. A single moment of being ignored can create attachment trauma. And these things hide in the nervous system. They don't show up logically, they show up through patterns, through reactions that don't match the situation, through the feeling that something is wrong even when nothing is happening. And most adults never decode those patterns. They just think, that's just how I am, not realizing they're living inside old wounds. And here's what gets really wild. Even your sense of self, the I in your head, is not a fixed thing. The brain constructs your identity moment by moment. There's a network called the default mode network. And this thing activates when you're thinking about yourself, your story, your past, your future. Meditation studies show that when that network quiets down, people feel like the self dissolves, like they become more aware, more free. That's because the ego, the constant narration, is just neural activity, not some permanent entity. This is why people say they change after trauma, after psychedelics, after deep reflection. The structure of the self literally reorganizes, and meanwhile, society expects people to behave consistently even when even though the brain itself is always changing. Every new experience, every emotion, every habit, every piece of information rewires the brain slightly. So when people stay stuck, it's not because they're lazy, it's because their neural pathways got used to repeating the same patterns. And repetition makes those pathways thicker, faster, more automatic. But the same brain that becomes stuck can also become unstoppable. Neuroplasticity works both ways. The real mind-blowing part is how much unconscious processing happens. You have around 90 billion neurons, and most of them fire without your awareness. By the time you consciously decide something, your brain already made the decision milliseconds before you. There are experiments where they track brain activity and can predict your choice before you know what you picked. That means free will, at least in the way we imagine it. It's way more complicated though. And then you add in emotion, which drives most human decisions, and emotion itself is just chemical storms shaped by hormones, past experiences, threat detection, reward expectation, and bodily states. People think they're rational, but the emotional brain is much faster than the logical one. Logic is slow. Emotion is instant. The body reacts before the mind interprets. That's why you get anxiety with no clear reason. The brain senses patterns the conscious mind can interpret. And this brings up something people rarely recognize. The subconscious mind processes up to 11 million bits of information per second, while the conscious mind handles maybe 40. Imagine that gap. Imagine how much of your daily behavior comes from the 11 million bits. The patterns you don't see, the signals you don't register, the instincts you ignore, the little vibes you pick up without understanding why. That's why society feels strange sometimes, because your subconscious detects mismatches before your conscious mind catches up. It picks up micro lies, contradictions, manipulations, fake smiles, hidden motives, and then you feel it in your chest or your gut. That's not paranoia, that's neurological sensitivity. And the deeper you go into human psychology, the more you see how layered everything is. The brain is not one mind. It's multiple systems fighting for control. You have the amygdala watching for danger, the prefrontal cortex trying to plan, the limbic system trying to get comfort, the reward system trying to chase stimulation, the memory networks trying to match patterns. You're basically a whole ecosystem pretending to be one person. And then we throw all of this into the modern world with overstimulation, constant comparison, high-speed information, fake perfection, nonstop warnings, endless entertainment, and people wonder why everything feels off. The human brain evolved for slow life, for quiet nights, for small communities, for predictable routines. Today, every sense gets overwhelmed daily. The nervous system never fully resets, and the result is exactly what we see everywhere. People who feel disconnected, confused, restless, pressured, drained, hyper alert, lost. But here's the thing nobody tells you. The mind can adapt. It can evolve faster than we think, but only if you take control of what you feed it. If you change the inputs, the outputs changes. If you shift your environment, your identity shifts. If you learn to observe your thoughts instead of drowning in them, your mind reorganizes. If you pay attention to your patterns without judging them, they start losing power. And when that happens, the world suddenly looks different. Not because the world changed, but because the filter changed. Because the hallucination updated. Because the inner architecture finally aligned with reality instead of running on old fear-based predictions. That's the thing nobody warns you about. The moment you start thinking deeply, everything starts unraveling. You can't go back to being asleep. You can't unsee the complexity behind every human interaction. You can't pretend society is simple. You can't pretend your old identity is the full truth. You start noticing things. Tiny details, micro motivations, subtle inconsistencies, and your whole worldview shifts. And once it shifts, it never goes back. That's what waking up actually means. Not enlightenment, but clarity.